Brother Chairman, Cousin Shine, I think Cousin Freilich is here somewhere, am I right? He's coming. Friends all, I'm delighted to be here tonight. This came about as this particular title some months ago, that I was in conversation with a friend of mine, and we spoke a long time about my life, and at the end of it all he said, why don't you write a book, your autobiography? You've written 9 books already, you might as well write another one and make it 10. And about half an hour after we had that chat over the phone, after having met the day before, Jack Glass phoned me up and he said, we'd like to invite you to speak to the lodge. And immediately it came to my mind that this might be a good title for the talk. Instead of talking about other Chazanim and so on and so forth, that people might be interested to hear how things came about as far as I'm concerned. My life's motto has been, Psalm 105 contains the pasuk, Shirulo Zamrulo Sichu B'chol Nifla Osov. Sing to him, make music to him, speak of all his wonders. And the same words, used originally by King David in Psalm 105, are again used as a special joyous celebration with a vast amount of singers and instrumentalists, as recorded in the first book of Chronicles in Divrei Hayamim, chapter 16. The well-known author of The World of Prayer, Rabbi Dr. Eli Munk, who's the father of later Jacobowitz, wrote, there are 2 pillars connecting us with the Ribono Shel Olam, with the Almighty. They are, first of all, of course, the Torah and the mitzvot, and song and music. And he mentioned that a few times in this particular publication. Now, I have a wonderful, distinguished audience here tonight, and I'm quite awesome about the task I have this evening, because it's the first time, as I mentioned to you before, that I've actually spoken in public about myself. So here goes, shan't keep you too long, tea will be at the appropriate time. Now, I was born in Karlsruhe, which is Germany. Some of you may have heard of it. We came here in 1933. When I say we, my parents, Rev Sholem, myself and my younger brother. My sister, who's here in the audience as well, Mrs. Leah Last, was born in England, in London, and that's one of the reasons we were able to stay in this country. From the age of 8, I went to the synagogue in Highbury, which was known as the Dalton Synagogue, in Poets Road. Some of you may remember that synagogue. It's a very beautiful synagogue. And I joined the choir at that age. Of course, Malcolm, yes, we used to sit together, Malcolm Wiseman here. And my journey into musical life and great interest in singing really began in 1935. I heard on the wireless, as it was known in those days, a performance of Tosca, direct from Covent Garden. The famous tenor aria just gripped me. This angelic voice got me very excited. It was the voice of Beniamino Gigli, and you're going to hear him straight away now. If it's too loud or too soft, turn it down. Now that was Benjamin Gili not singing Tosca, but singing Forget Me Not. The reason I'm playing this is that about a year after I first heard the voice of Gili from Covent Garden, this film, Forget Me Not, was released, and I was at that time in the yeshiva in 4th Street, the Etzraim yeshiva, and just around the corner they were playing this particular film. I had to ask permission of the Rosh Yeshiva if he would allow me to hear this particular film and everything that was in it. So really the film just was patched up in order to show the voice of Gili. And he gave me permission, and I saw it no less than 3 times, believe it or not. Now, soon after that, about 6 months after that, there was a vacancy in the shul at the Dawson Synagogue. I don't know whether Malcolm remembers that. The Chazan Fassenfeld had retired, and there was a vacancy. It was announced in the press as normal for people to apply for the position. And you can imagine 1936, people by then could see what's happening in Europe. And we had 1 whole year of Chazanim on trial. Whether they pay them or not, I'm not sure. But the whole year, every Shabbat, there was a Chazan on trial. And I was quite young those days. I didn't understand the politics of these things. But they kept the best one, of course, to the end. And it was Jacob Kazavitsky. When he was due to come, I was amazed myself. They were say, hanging from the lamp, you know, hanging from the lamp in order to get in. A lot of men had to go upstairs into the ladies' gallery, and he was appointed. He was appointed, and he came over with his family, his wife and 2 children, 2 girls at the time, with whom I'm still very, very friendly, also very much like members of the family, really. And they moved into the flat, which was adjoining the synagogue in Poets Road. He couldn't speak a word of English, and the choir master couldn't speak a word of Yiddish or German or anything of that nature. So I, being in the choir, at that time I was a little older, was the Maturgamon, was the interpreter between the Chazan and the choir master. We had a very big choir, about 28 altogether. And through that I became very, very close to Kazavitsky, and all the years we corresponded right till the very end. I'm just going to play part of the Friday night Kiddush, which was his usual style every week. More or less this was the style that one would hear, with variations. It was never the same notes, unless he was singing a written composition. Then of course he would stick to the music as it's written, particularly if it's with a choir. But generally speaking, it just depends what mood he was in order to inspire the congregation with his chazanut. And I've been very sport, I must say. I've been very lucky with my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Eli Lopian in the Etzraim Yeshiva, with my teacher for chazanut. And I'll speak about that a little later on. So this is Kiwana Bochato, which you all know from Friday Night Kiddush.
on the floor by just by
It's on the floor, Reuben.
by your foot.
That was Jacob Kazavitsky, my teacher and mentor. As I said, we became very close over the years, and it's very difficult for me, I must say, to get used to going around to synagogue now that I'm out of an official position, and to make comparisons with Jacob. Out of the four brothers, as I'm sure you all know, there were four famous brothers Kazavitsky. The most famous one was, of course, Moshe, because he had that great range and power. You'll hear him in a few moments. But what we term in Yiddish as a zucker, somebody who improvises more or less on the spot. And I'm not talking about particular nusach here, but something which is out of nusach, which you can deviate from, which is permissible. He was the expert. He was known as the zucker of the four brothers. Even their own mother said that. The best chazan out of the four is the uncle, Jacob. Now, then war broke out, and my brother and his sister were evacuated to Wakefield in Yorkshire, and a number of families that we knew wanted to get out of London, and the nearest Jewish community was, of course, Leeds. And we moved to Leeds in 1940, and I stayed there actually until 1945, taking a degree in accountancy, which I never used, but went to Manchester to take the degree. And I conducted my first Yamim Naraim services, high holiday services, at the age of 17. At the age of, well, I won't say what age. In 1947 I got married, and a year after our marriage there was an economic crash, and I was originally, when my wife married me, I was a businessman together with my father. I was working with my father. And when the crash came, and many things happened at the time which I won't go into because of the financial situation generally, I had to look around for an additional parnossa because my father couldn't keep the business going. And I took on a position in Finsbury Park, which was mentioned before by the chairman, following Chazan Feder, who was very well known at the time, and Diane Grunfeld was in that position as minister, and Reverend Clayman as the assistant minister. And there was this vacancy as a part-time Chazan after Feder left, which I took on, and I took on another job part-time too, so we were able to carry on our lives. By that time we already had our eldest child, Marion Posen, some of you know from around here, and that's the way we continued. But what I want to point out at this particular point is that during that particular period my voice was broken. I didn't sing anymore except, as I said, high holidays, but otherwise not at all. And continued studying music and voice production. By the way, forgive me for sitting, I'm really not feeling too well today, as some of you may have realized. So, what I want to play you now is a person I became very friendly with, and a lovable person. He died far too young. That was Shlomo Karbach. And the last Shabbos that he was here in England, he was in the local shul, and he came over to me, we hugged each other. People didn't like it, but nevertheless it happened. That's the sort of guy he was. And he was like the Chazanim of old in Europe. Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Yeah? Chazanim of old, you know, they used to have a chazan with a choir, maybe 10 or 12 choristers going around, itinerant chazanim, and they composed a piece, let's say the Chododi, Friday night. The chazan would on the spot compose a piece which he'd never ever sung before, and slowly, slowly build it up, with the choir taking up that particular piece as well, and then the whole congregation would sing that particular piece. And this is the sort of thing that Shlomo Karbach has been doing, and many synagogues have taken this up as well, whether one likes it or not. That is a fact. And he's left some wonderful legacy to us. I mean, some of the songs, Od Yishoma Be'ore Yehuda, Yisroel B'tap Hashem, Esoenai, hundreds of songs. And as I said earlier, unfortunately he died far too young, but he has left us this legacy, and his daughter, Neshama, is singing his songs all over the world at the present time. Here is singing Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, and this is typical of the itinerant Chazanim who would go around Europe. Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. Stop it there, and now carry on with the story. Good, it doesn't work. Shows you I'm not well at this here. Now, I stayed in the Finsbury Park Synagogue for 3 years, and then a very good friend of mine, Dr. Alex Tobias, who some of you may remember, who was originally the minister, the rabbi in Edgware Synagogue. When Reverend Amius went into the army, he took over the shul in Edgware. He was very, very much liked. He had a fantastic memory, brilliant mind, and he was very popular in Edgware. But Saul Amius came back. Saul Amius of course. He came back from the army, and of course he took on the old position that he had before he went into the forces. And Alex Tobias followed Diane Moshe Swift in the Brixton Synagogue. And we met at a seminar, weekend seminar. It was very, very musical. I'm talking about Dr. Tobias now. And we had a lot to discuss. And when the Chazan of Brixton, who was called Katz, went to the States, he phoned me up and he said, Reuben, I just want you to come here for 2 years and then go wherever you want to go. And my wife, Shalom, and I went to Brixton for Shabbos to see what it's like, but I had no idea. You know, South London, people laughing there, well remembered. And, you know, to us it was like
Foreign country.
way away, the desert. But we liked it very much indeed, really liked it. I mean, I had a choir there of 30 people, 24 boys and 6 men, week after week after week. And I heard this and the way it was going, and I came there, as I said, for a probe, for the trial, and we accepted the position for 2 years under those conditions. And the United Synagogue had to buy a house for us. Oh, geschäft about it, I won't trouble you with that. But that's where I was. And then I took music, singing seriously. As I told you before, I was originally in business, so singing and music and reading music and that sort of thing was only a hobby at the time. But now, as I was in it in a full-time capacity, this was a full-time position, a very big community. We had 1,200 families, 1,200 families. I was also in charge of the youth club there. I was there every Thursday night. People nodding their head, they remember me being there, right. And it was really a full-time job, plus 6 hospitals to visit every week, which doesn't happen these days anymore. So it was really a full-time position. And I had to look for a good tutor for voice production. And after a long search, I found a man called Manlio de Veroli. I phoned him up and asked for an appointment. He doesn't take everybody, he tests your voice first and so on. And he lived at the back of Selfridges, where they have these mews, where years ago they had downstairs for the horses, you know, the stables. But that was all changed and they became garages and so on. And lo and behold, as I knocked at the door, I see a mezuzah by the side of the door. I was delighted. Went up the steps, quite a number of steps to go up, and saw this gentleman who immediately struck me as being a Sephardi Jew. And he said, oh, I'm very pleased you came, never mind about your voice. But the Sephardim, I don't know if you know, wear on their talit katon and their tzitzis small tehillim, sefer tehillim. His was being used out. And he said, maybe you can get me one of these, I've been looking for one for ages. Anyway, after some time, he accepted me as his pupil. There I met, week after week, Sir Harry Seacombe, who I'm sure you all know and remember well, Alfred Marks. I could go on, a long list of people. And I became actually quite friendly with Sir Harry Seacombe. He was Ohev Yisrael, he loved the Jewish people. And he gave many, many concerts for charity in aid of Jewish charities. And that was the situation, being a full-time minister, Chazan, that I could do things within the community which I had wanted to do previously. I started a B'nai Asaf group. Asaf was one of the chief Levites in temple times, conductor and choir master. And we had 3 groups going, one in Brixton, all for children under 14, one we had in Edgware, another one in Ilford. And we started in Brixton. I founded this movement, and it went on for about 5 years, and then things happened that some children were busy with homework, all kinds of things like that. But most of them could play an instrument. If they couldn't, then they had to bring a special record of their liking for that particular week. Every week these sessions were held, and it brought in a lot of interest in music generally. I've worked over, from the time I was in Brixton, 23 world-renowned Chazanim who came to this country for the first time, with whom I had to argue a lot over the phone and writing regarding the fee. Because if they were in the States, they were getting very high fees, and I said, you know, you're not known here, we have to establish you, and so on and so forth. This went on time after time. There was only one that refused to come because the fee was so low. And the others came again, and of course the fee went up. They were known, they were popular. So 23 Chazanim I brought on my own accord. I'm quite proud of it. I formed the Jewish Music Council together with Sidney Fixman. Some of you may remember him, know him. He was the conductor of the Ben Uri Chamber Orchestra at the time. He's now the conductor and tutor of the Jewish Youth Orchestra. And also Barry Fieldman, who was the curator of the Benori Art Gallery. The three of us formed the Jewish Music Council. We started off in 1959 with Jewish Music Week, having about 24 lectures, recitals and concerts during that particular week throughout London. It became so popular that the following year we had to make it into a month, which had remained for over 12 years, Jewish Music Month. During that time I was also president of the Chazanim Association from 1956 until 1962. And during that period I made a recording for the United Synagogue of selections from the Seder service, which is still running today in cassette form and was sent even to Israel for sale there too. Now, the Veroli, the maestro as we called him, was also a terrific composer. And I'd just like you to hear one of his compositions, again sung by Gidi, who you heard before. It's Casarella, which is a white house on top of a cliff by the sea, Casarella. By Magno de Veroli. Just change this one moment. In 1988, I formed the Society for the Promotion of Jewish Liturgical Music together with Jack Rosenberg and Maurice Joseph Oliver Scholem. And the three of us promoted Jewish music. That was the purpose wherever we could, and we put on many concerts in order to do that. Also the broadcasts of Spectrum Radio began in 1988. And I was interviewed by John Kay, who was at that time the first presenter of the program, about a book which I'd published, which was called Jewish Living. It's now in its 4th edition, I'm pleased to say. And he came back to me a few days after the broadcast and said, Reuben, you have a very good voice for speaking on the radio. You mentioned that some of your hobbies are chazanut and so on. Would you like to present a program of half an hour for 8 weeks? Let's try it out. I did, and it lasted for 11 years. No payment, all on me. But I enjoyed it, and the public enjoyed it, and I could tell by the response, either by letters or by telephone calls. I allow them to give my telephone numbers home, and people phone me in the evening. I would say about 30% from non-Jewish people who couldn't catch the title of the song that I was playing, and they asked me what it was, where can they obtain it. I think I sent a lot of people to Jerusalem the Gold in the shop, made quite a big profit out of it, more than me. And this went on, as I said, for a very long time. And again, it created, I believe, quite a lot of interest in Chazanut, because people were listening all the time. It began on a Thursday, which appeared to be a good day for housewives, because before they went to do their shopping, they would listen to this or record it for their husbands. Later on, the Spectrum radio was up for sale, and although we tried, I say there were 5 of us that went around to very important, influential and financial wizards to try and get the support, sponsorship for the program, but no go, and it was bought by somebody else from the Middle Eastern countries, and we were meant to be squeezed out of the program, but they couldn't actually do it because it was the Jewish people themselves who formed the program for minority groupings, and the Jewish program had to remain. The only thing was they moved our hour from in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which wasn't too comfortable with some of the ladies who had been listening. But other people joined the group, and they started hearing the program, which they enjoyed very much. Recently, the Shalom FM radio program has come on. A number of us have been on the program. They applied for a mini license, which one has to do through the radio authority, in order eventually to get a permanent license. It's been on twice, for 2 months, 2 separate months, 6 months intervals. And I appeared again for 3/4 of an hour on the Chazanut slot, and again, very good reaction from everybody who was listening. I'm going to play now Moshe Kazavitsky, who I mentioned earlier before, who I had him to broadcast Yerushalayim Ircho on the last program of the session, which ended just 10 days ago, a couple of weeks ago. And here you will hear him, first of all, not sing, but speak. The moment that the State of Israel came into being, he flew over from New York in order to sing to the troops, to the IDF. And he's speaking here to the troops, and then we'll hear Yerushalayim Ircho. Part of it, by the way, because we ran out of time. The presenter of the program kept me talking for so long that we had to curtail it at the end. We're going to hear something most unusual with Moshe Kazavitsky. He's speaking, not sing first. Immediately the state came into being, he rushed over to Israel from New York in order to give concerts to the troops. And he's saying a few words here about this particular piece. So let's hear what they call. עכשיו שמעתם בירושלים ירחו. הקומפוזיציה אותה יצרתי אף היא קשורה במדינת ישראל. היה לי הכבוד להופיע בעצרת גדולה למען המדינה היהודית, יחד עם השגריר הראשון של ארצות הברית בישראל, מר ג'יימס מקדונלד. לפי התוכנית המקורית הייתי צריך לשיר אותו ערב את השיר ירושלים, אך היושב ראש הכריז להפתעתי, וישב ישיר משה קוזביצקי בירושלים עירך ברחמים תשוב. ניגשתי אל המיקרופון מלאי גלגולים. מאותו רגע ממש, כאילו ירדה מן השמיים
קומפוזיציה מוכנה. התחלתי לשיר, אונסות גזומי, ושרתי. ועוד באותו ערב, כשחזרתי הביתה, רשמתי מיד את התווים.
We'll hear now part of this particular piece for Shleimicho, which you'll find on page 83, sung by Moshe Kuzovitsky. Part of it. Thank you. At this moment, of course, our thoughts go to Eretz Israel. Let's hope we have good news soon. I would like at this stage to thank Peterman's, the estate agent of Edgeware, for sponsoring the Chazanut program throughout this month, and thank Richard Ford and Michael Mendoza and Marie for all their help during these 4 weeks. May Hashem bless you all. Let's have good news. We're going into the month of Adar, Mishinechnas Adar, Marbim B'Simcha. Let's hear Surah Torah. Good news all round, particularly from Eretz Israel. Lehitraot, Kol Tov, Shalom. That was the great Moshe Kuzovitsky, who I consider the king of Chazanim. His style, his demeanor. The first time I met him was actually at the Dalton Synagogue in Poets Road after the war. He came to his brother, who I told you before lived on the premises at Poets Road, and we were all going into Dab Mincha, and he walked in with a camel-coloured coat and a grey hat, Anthony Eden type of hat, and the moment you saw him you knew this was a great personality. And I dealt with all the four brothers, as some of you have got the CD of the four brothers Kazavitsky will have known if you read the booklet. And it was a great thrill to have known these giants in Chazanut, because they were brought up, they were really milked in it actually from their mothers. And Moshe Kazavitsky has done a great deal for Chazanut worldwide. Now, I mentioned to you before that I brought over a number of Chazanim for the first time, and one of them is Benjamin Muller from Antwerp. The first time he came here was for a Sfiras Ha'omer service at the Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue. I don't know if any of you were there, but that was just really the first visit to England. And I just want you to hear his voice, very, very pleasant voice, over many years, the famous Chazan of Antwerp. Prior to that he was in Johannesburg, and he is singing Eish Chayil, which we say on Friday night, praising the mother, the wife, and everything connected with ladies. Eish Chayil. That was Chazan Benjamin Muller, who, as I said earlier, conducted the spiritual honor services in Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue. I'm pleased to see Avrami Freilich here, the Chazan of Hampstead Garden Suburb, with us here this evening. Thank you. I mentioned earlier that I was due to be in South London for 2 years. Do you remember that? So at the beginning of the programme, more or less. And I remained 18 years, by the way, outside bricks, not inside. And the reason being that I won't go into all the details, it's a long story, but this Dr. Tobias, who I mentioned earlier, suddenly disappeared from South London, and I was left on my own together with an assistant minister. Brixton always had an assistant minister. In constituent synagogues years ago, it was a custom that there were 5 synagogue constituents, that anyone who wanted to enter into the ministry had to serve a kind of apprenticeship for 2 years in a constituent synagogue. And Brixton was one of those, so we always had an assistant minister. But this assistant minister couldn't lane, and it was about 3 weeks before Purim, and the Gabba phoned me up and says, Reuben, Tobias is not here anymore, you'll have to lane the Megillah, which I'd never done in my life before. And anyway, I prepared it and everything was all right. But when the applicants were interviewed and given a Shabbat to come over to the shul, on the officers and the Board of Management were not too keen on the applicants, although we had over 50 applicants, but a short list of 8. And they asked me, they wanted me to stay. By that time it was already 18 months within the 2-year period, and it was running out of time for us to leave, you know, we were due to leave at the end of 2 years. And we had already started a kindergarten and other activities during that period of the 18 months that I was there. And they said, we would like you and your wife to remain with us, and you choose who you would like as your colleague. I said, there's only one person that I know, and the name was Steinberg. We had met previously at a Mizrahi conference. We got on very well together. He came from a long line of Rabbanim, and he was a wonderful man. I said, that's the only one I know. At the moment he's in Notting Hill because he was demobbed from the Polish forces at the time. His wife and daughter had been in the camps in Auschwitz, and they had been reunited, thank God, and he was studying English. So he came for Shabbos, he stayed with us by himself, and he got up to preach, and where I was sitting, which was on top of the, next to the ark, the rabbi and the chazan sat on top, facing the congregation, and facing the warden's box, you know, the warden's box in front of the bima. And the moment the rabbi, as he was at the time, Rabbi Steinberg, started speaking, one of the wardens caught my eye, you know, from a distance, and just shook his head because the man had an accent. They were so used to typical English ministers being there that they couldn't take it after only 2 or 3 words, you know, it's sort of, no, nicht is nicht, what can I do? And they turned him down. So they advertised again, and got less applicants because a number of those who had applied earlier didn't apply again. They made a short list of 5. In the meantime, time was running out as far as my stay in Brixton was concerned. And the 5 that they had, they couldn't choose those either. It came back to me, can you think of anyone else? I said, no, it's only Steinberg. So I said, look, it's a few weeks have gone past, a few months. He was a brilliant linguist, he knew about 8 languages. I said, that's the only one I would work with. So they said, all right, let's have him again, let his wife come as well, which they both came and stayed with us. And after a few words, they loved him. You know, it was quite remarkable. And for that reason, my 2 years turned into 18 years. Because I could work with this person, I knew it's all right. I knew that we would make great strides. They themselves were very dubious because, again, they didn't know what South London was like. I showed them and took them around everywhere I could and made it interesting, and they agreed to come. And as I say, that's the reason that I stayed for that period of time. But then he became a full-time Dayan, and he did not want to be on the shoulders of the new man who would be coming in. So they moved to Kenton. And after he moved, I felt it's about time I moved too. And we moved to northwest London and took over my in-laws' home. Couldn't afford any other place because I'd been living in the United Synagogue home. And we moved to Golders Green. And in 1973 I became the director of the JNF Education and Youth Department, and was able to introduce many musical events such as the School Choirs Festival, Some of you remember that. I'm just going to play a short piece here now, just a few moments. I brought over Dudu Fischer, again the first time into this country, and through that he became the star at Les Mis, as you know, in the West End, and many other artists as well, in aid of the JNF at the time. I went around with Rabbi Mervis 3 times throughout the country, speaking to children in the classes, in schools and so on, and also produced many publications for the JNF at the time. So here I just wanted to hear a few moments the Matilda Marx Kennedy School Choir singing part of the ending of the Seder service. Choir of Matilda Marx Kennedy School, which took part every year in the School Choirs Festival. This went on for some 13 years. We began with about 8 choirs, the first time that I put this on, and we ended up with 15 choirs. And we would have as a mass choirs item about 600 children on the stage. Some couldn't get on the stage, had to be down below by the apron. And it was really quite remarkable. Boys and girls singing together, making music for a whole afternoon. We never had an interval. And they came from Leeds, from Manchester, from Glasgow, from all over. And it stopped for various reasons. But I was delighted that was done. And you know that there are some people that meet me sometimes in the street, they come running over and they say to me, "You won't recognise me, but I took part in the School Choirs Festival." Unfortunately, when I was sitting Shiva recently, there must have been at least a dozen people, I don't know how old they were, who, as they came towards where I was sitting, I said, "Who are you? You know, people you don't know." They said, "Well, we sang your School Choirs Festival," and they came. It was very sweet. Whilst I was with the JNF, I was in a position to bring over orchestras, youth orchestras, and also choirs on behalf of the JNF, and they would sing and raise money for the JNF. And the Rishon LeZion Youth Orchestra, which numbered about 30 youngsters, we had to place them in northwest London area for stay, to reside there during their stay in London. They gave concerts in Manchester and in Leeds, greatly successful. And the other group that I brought over was from Petah Tikva, which is the music college of Petah Tikva. Directed and principal is Chaim Kirsch, who composed many pieces. And he brought over this choir. These were all going to be teachers in the future in Jewish day schools and day schools throughout Israel and Chutz La'aretz as well. And what you're going to hear now is a live recording of a concert they gave for B'nai Brit in St. John's Wood Synagogue Hall. And the conductor, the principal, Chaim Kirsch, composed a special piece for me and presented me with the manuscript of the music, which I hung up in my home, had it there for some time. And the piece you're going to hear, first of all, is Orach Hamon from Berachas HaMozon from Benchen, which most people know, I'm sure. And secondly, we'll follow on with Yisrael Amenu, which he composed, as I say, in my honor.
Alleluia.
choir from Petah Tikva Music College, conducted by Chaim Kirsch. We're coming at the end. Recently I was able to produce a CD in memory of the four Kazabitskis brothers. The last brother died about a year before I put this thing together. He was Simcha Kazabitsky, who was Chazan in the end in Cape Town. He had previously been the chief cantor, the chief Chazan in the great synagogue, Duke's Place, and before that in Chequer Lane and in Glasgow. And when he passed away, I was determined that something should be put together which will keep in mind this wonderful talent that these four brothers had. And it came out, it was launched on the 100th anniversary of Moshe Kazabitsky's birth. I've also produced recently 2 cassettes called Master Chazanim, and I'm glad to see Alan Freeman, who's at the back there, who helped me produce it. Thank you.
Good.
And this is available for anyone who's interested. They have 12 and 13 Chazanim, 12 in one, 13 in the other, of the old school, going back to Sirota and so on. They are available at, must plug something, at the Menorah Book Centre in Golders Green Road. And I've also recently become the patron, honour given to me by the London Cantorial Singers, and the conductor of that choir, David Druce, is here this evening. The founder of the choir was the late Ian Lyons, Oliver Sholem, and I'm very glad to see Cynthia here tonight. And we carry on, do as much as we can as far as music is concerned still. I had to put in one piece in English, and many years ago I saw Mario Lanza when he came here for the premiere of The Great Caruso, many years ago.
Yeah.
And I was terrifically impressed with the man, and I spoke to him only a few words, but by just speaking to him and the memory of his voice, this terrific voice, even without any microphones or without any amplification, was absolutely tremendous. And the song that he sings, I'll Walk with God, really typifies my own situation, and I hope you enjoy it when I put it in.
I'll walk with God from this day on. His helping hand I'll lean upon. This is my prayer, my humble plea. May the
out. I bought a cassette along of my own recording, or somebody, which is what normally happens when I speak about other chazanim. They always say, what about you? Why haven't you? I have. But this is a live recording taken, I think, in, I wrote it here somewhere, in 1961, I think, many years ago. And it was taken at the New West End Synagogue, part of a concert of 6 chazanim. The accompanist was the famous Leo Brill, and I'm singing here Zocheinu L'Chaim. The quality is not that wonderful. It was taken privately in the hall, Zocheinu L'Chaim, and I end with that, wishing us all Chaim, good life, health and happiness.
beautiful evening. Question with our friend here.
Any questions? 5 minutes.
Please, don't be shy.
They've got the refreshments ready. The small refreshments ready.
Alan.
Shall we thank Reuben for a
Alan.
fascinating evening, and you've been very modest in only letting us hear one of your
No.
tune. But just a thought that whilst there's this great interest in Jewish music, in Chazanot, it's in the concert hall rather than in the shul. And I just wondered if you'd like to give your thoughts of why that might have happened.
Yes, I have my thoughts on that, and over many years. With no disrespect to the Chazanim present here. As you heard, for many years I was the president of the Chazanim Association, and we used to have annual conferences, meetings. And I began at the time with Chief Rabbi Brody, asking him to come down and be guest speaker at one of these conferences. And he mentioned the very first time that he came to us, the fact that Chazanim are spoiling their own case by overrunning the time of the services. The following year, Chief Rabbi Brody had left, retired, and Chief Rabbi Jacobowitz was invited. And without telling him what to say, of course, the first thing he got up and said, you know, you're spoiling yourselves by having these long services. Why can you not curtail them? Everybody would love Chazanot and would like, if we finish at a certain time, not go beyond that time. The following year he came again and he said, do you remember what I told you last year? Nothing has changed. He said, I've been going around the community and it's still exactly the same. I think one has to work this out. And the reason I mentioned before about working with Rabbi Steinberg, Meyer Steinberg, in my days, was that we met every Thursday evening. Every Thursday evening we met. We lived opposite each other. Besides the fact that he taught my son Gemara, I mean, that's something that we're very grateful to. But we met every Thursday evening and discussed the following service for Shabbos. Whether there was an Ofruf, whether there was a Bar Mitzvah, or any other Simcha, or something like that. But we finished on the dot at 12 o'clock. And I sang, believe me, I sang many, many compositions with the choir. I mean, I had the choir there, might as well make use of them. But if he was going to speak from the pulpit, then I had to curtail the inverted commas, the program for the chazan and the choir. But we finished 12 o'clock, and people knew this. And we got packed shuls every week. Some people were there, this particular thing. And I've been trying to tell my colleagues this when I was president. I said exactly the same thing. You have to work it out, you have to work at it. It doesn't just happen. I mean, there's some shuls here, I must tell you, quite honestly, when I go to some of the local shuls in here, and it comes after 12 o'clock, you may see me walking out. No disrespect, but you know, there's a limit, You're there from 9 o'clock, I mean, if you come at 5 to 12, okay, it's a different matter. You come at 9 o'clock until 12 o'clock, a bit too viel. So I believe that is the reason for it. So that it's moved. And that, by the way, has encouraged the alternative services, which, as everybody knows, I've said this over the air on broadcasts, I'm very much against alternative services, very much. Chief Rabbi doesn't like me for that, I know. But it doesn't matter. They have done a lot of harm to the shul itself. You take a shul like Hendon, or rather close. It's a big shul, a full-time rabbi, a full-time chazan, shamas with a top hat. You've got a full choir then every week, or should be there every week, right? And you get people coming in at 9:30, it irritates me, it really irritates me. I'm there from 9 o'clock, right? They come in at 9:30, and one particular person's got the chutzpah to bring in two little boys. He walks up the steps to the Oren Kodesh to the rabbi. The rabbi should give the two boys sweets. He walks down again and goes out. So all turn and I complain to the Gaboim. And the warden says, what's going on here? So he can't. He said he's a very, very distinguished person in the community. You can't upset him. So this is what happens. You've got the chevra going into the alternative service packed out. You can't get in. So what happens? They're in the corridor talking. They're not davening. Yeah, I mean it. So see you afterwards. We want to. So this is part and parcel of the reason. So people are listening to Chazanot at home or in the car, but not so much in the synagogue, because the Chazanim have told to cut it down, you know, because all the other things, opposition you've got from the other services. You've got to finish at the same time. in Raleigh Close you have to finish at the same time because there's a kiddish going on in the community centre where you don't want everybody running into the kiddish and then nothing left. So you've got to coordinate it, you know. The Shamus level is running from one wing to the other. Where are you up to? Where are you up to? That's Thank you.
Without Romy finished prompt at 12 o'clock.
I know. He's got a bit of work.
It's quiet. That's why we're full every
One more
time.
question, no more. One more,
One more?
if anyone.
I would just like to say how
Lydia?
much you were treasured at our school in Brixton for many, many
Bless
years.
you, thank you very much indeed.
You were the innovator of many things there, and you've left your mark,
Many thanks.
and many people remember you.
Yeah, well.
Romy?
I would just like to say that when I was growing up, I'm cousin of Romy Floyd, the cousin of Council Garden Soul today, and have been for nearly 10 years now. When I was, I think must have been 10 or 11 years old.
You?
Yes.
No, you.
No, I mean, yeah. There wasn't much in the way of guidance or teaching for young children who were interested in Chazonis. And Reverend Turner discovered me. And
Through your grandfather?
that, yes, and trained me. This was for your youngest daughter's wedding, and I sang at St John's Wood for Reverend Turner's youngest daughter's wedding, and which was a big thrill for me, and that got me interested in Chazonis, and probably one of the reasons why I'm a Chazan today is due to Reverend Turner, who guided me and instructed me with a lot of love. And I have to say, every time that I came to his house, his wife used to give me sweeties, you know, yeah, we never go over 12 o'clock, and we have a full shul every week of 600, 700, 800 people. So.
Good people.